In the grandiloquent pantheon of dialectical diatribes, amidst the amphitheater of pseudo-intellectual cerebrations, one must pontificate with Herculean rigor upon the convoluted dichotomy between financialized capital accumulation and the Marxian exegesis of bourgeois expropriation.
Most CEOs do, in fact, have a substantial stake in the company. Is that even true? I feel like that's probably not true. Unless maybe, I mean, if you include all the small businesses, it's probably true because the CEO probably tends to be the owner. But they have substantially more ownership than most individual shareholders. That's probably true. But like CEOs can be fired. I mean, they are fired or traded out all the time, but by Destiny's argument, anyone who has a 401k is part of the owner class because they own parts of a business. This has to be his dumbest take yet. That's, yes, owning, yeah. Gains in your 401k would be exploitation of labor by a Marxist definition. Yes. Owning stock in a company is literally what makes you part of an owning class. Yes, this is capitalism. And this would be the exploitation of labor. Where is the additional value coming from in your 401k? It's coming from the profits, basically, that are generated by the laborer, by the worker. Your 401k is capital that you own. Yes, definitionally so. Why does it have 24 upvotes on my subreddit? That's literally what it is. Thank you. Well, yes. Oh, 3 upvotes. Well, actually, yes, according to the Marxism, according to Marxism, that's technically true. I think a point Destiny is trying to make is silly and out-of-date Marxism is for our current economy. A rich CEO with a high income and no stocks or capital would technically be a proletariat, while a low-wage worker with stocks owns capital, so they're part of the bourgeois. They're not like super bougie, right? I mean, it's not like they own enough to survive off of for the rest of their life, or they own like whole parts of a company, but I don't think back in Marx's day, it's probably not that common, my guess, that an ordinary laborer also owned parts of the company as well, right? No, there is quite obviously a difference between getting 0.001% share in Publix because you worked there for 10 years versus owning a huge portion or a majority or all the shares of a business. How many CEOs even own a majority of their business? Like for large companies, the amount of wealth, influence, and direct power within and downstream from the business is vastly different. And it's bad faith, debate, dishonesty to say, well, technically they're the same thing. Then just be clear about what you're talking about. Elon? Does Elon Musk even own over 50% of Tesla? I thought that's why, weren't they talking about ousting him as the CEO? How could they do that if he has 51% of the voting rights? Keep in mind also that voting rights and ownership could be different things. So like, for instance, I think Mark Zuckerberg owns like 15% of Facebook, but I think he owns almost 60% of the stock that allows him to vote, like Class B versus Class A shares. So you can have a smaller ownership while still having like more of the voting rights. The whole point of this also, by the way, like I'm not even making the claim that CEOs don't get paid or that their compensation might not be tied to the appreciation of the value of the company or anything else. But like, I mean, like technically every employee is tied to the success of the company too. If a company is really successful, you're probably going to get or hire like people at higher wages. You're probably going to pay more for workers if you've got like a more successful company, right? And also if the company like starts to lose a bunch of money, they're probably going to fire people too. So like it's not as direct in terms of owning, owning stock or having huge ownership percentages. Everybody in chat can spam not true, okay? But there's a reason why people want to work for the most successful companies in the United States and not work for Joe Schmo's random shack, okay? You can say not true if you want, but that's the reality of the situation, okay? Like, actually, just because a company's successful doesn't mean they pay more wages. That's why instead of working at Amazon, I actually work at IT for Joe's clock shop because they actually pay me way more than companies like Apple would. Okay. He's saying both sides should have full consequences for their action. But if we're discussing about whether someone should receive sympathy, Feel so out of touch to argue that the person you didn't have sympathy for actually didn't deserve it anyway, while the people who oh my God. Remember this sub simping his tweet about a fireman getting shot, now a CEO with some actual power and influence over people's lives? And what? Show me what he did that was wrong. It's like he worked in healthcare. Okay, whatever. Okay, good times.
And who, pray tell, emerges from the cybernetic agora of digital disputations, but the loquacious and inexorably vexatious Destiny, engaging in the most audacious of misapprehensions regarding the economic substratum that girds our neo-feudalist corporatocracy. Let us unfurl the scroll of this discourse with an exordium on the axiomatic misnomer perpetuated by the petit bourgeois apologists who declaim that mere stock ownership is tantamount to dominion within the hegemonic citadel of capital. What grandiloquent fatuity to posit that the ephemeral accumulation of fractionalized equity within an intergalactic conglomerate places one within the echelons of the ruling class is as jejune as supposing that possession of a morsel of stale bread in a famine renders one a master baker. Destiny, in his endeavor to harmonize the vagaries of free market theological doctrine with the Marxian rubric of class struggle, ventures into the quagmire of reifying the mere existence of capital ownership into a categorization indistinguishable from the oligarchic captains of industry. He, in his dulcet dulciloquence, opines that possession of a 401k, a fiscal apparatus of deferred gratification and employer-mitigated servitude, renders the wage earner an equal to the veritable captains of monopoly finance. But behold, this is no mere fallacy, but a chimera so grotesque that even the Gorgons themselves recoil in trepidation. The sine qua non of Marxian economic dialectics resides in the distinction between capital ownership as an abstraction and the material control over the means of production. The prolix verbosity of Destiny's syllogisms obfuscates the stark reality. Possessing minuscule fractions of equity within a corporation neither bestows one with boardroom dominion nor imbues one with the prerogative to dictate the superstructural flow of labor surplus extraction. The proletarian, forever enchained within the maw of hyperfinancialized servility, is but a transient tenant upon the precipice of capital's inexorable dominion. Let us, with alacritous scrutiny, eviscerate this fallacious conflation of fractional stock ownership with substantive economic power. The veritable bourgeois magnates, those economic leviathans bestriding the globe with untrammeled puissance, do not merely own shares in an ephemeral sense. Nay, they wield dominion through concentrated ownership, holding the reins of corporate governance, dictating policy through consolidated voting power, and leveraging capital in a manner that transcends the plebeian mirage of retail investment. One need only scrutinize the bifurcation between Class A and Class B shares within the Silicon Valley fiefdoms to comprehend that not all equity is forged equal. The bourgeoisie's pecuniary leverage is manifest in control, not in numerical shares held by the pension wage earner. And yet, Destiny's interpretative gymnastics pirouette past this structural materialism, plunging into an abyss of ideologically confected egalitarian mysticism wherein ownership, bereft of influence, is transmogrified into a phantasm of economic democracy. But one must inquire, with the severity of a scholastic inquisitor, does the proletariat possess the sovereignty to dictate the operational modus of their so-called owned corporations? Do the laborers, by virtue of their infinitesimal stock holdings, hold the executive autocrats to account, commanding the allocation of surplus value or determining the strategic course of enterprise? Verily, they do not, for their so-called ownership is but an ephemeral simulacrum, a specter of fiscal agency conjured by the high priests of capital to mollify the unwashed masses into a pacified stupor. What Destiny fails to apprehend, in his impassioned oratory, is that Marxist analysis does not merely concern itself with the perfunctory possession of financial instruments, but rather with the dynamic forces of labor exploitation and surplus appropriation. To own a modicum of stock is not to wield capital in its Marxian totality. It is to be subsumed into the parasitic machinery of fictitious capital, wherein value extraction occurs irrespective of one's nominal stake in the grand corporate edifice. Should we engage in a comparative dialectical reflection upon the CEO's ostensible plight? Another of destiny's vacillations emerges like a grotesque hydra from the depths of ideological mendacity. The corporate executive, he contends, faces precarity, termination, and subjugation to market vicissitudes akin to the average worker. But what spectacular mendacity! The CEO, upon exodus from his gilded throne, departs not into the destitute gulag of wage enslavement, but into a pantheon of sinecures, golden parachutes, and consulting fiefdoms, ensconced forevermore within the cocoon of capital's largesse. Shall we, then, entertain destiny's further conflation between employment stability and stock value appreciation? He endeavors to assert that all laborers are inexorably tethered to their firm's success, that wage augmentation follows corporate prosperity, that mere exposure to market forces is in itself a mechanism of capital participation. But let the empirical phalanxes of industrial stagnation eviscerate this saccharine sophistry. For history resounds with the lamentations of laborers whose toil engendered boundless profit, only for capital to remunerate them with pink slips, wage suppression, and transnational outsourcing. One must exorcise, with the surgical precision of an ideological exorcist, the wraith of economic obfuscation that haunts destiny's deliberations. The calculus of capital accumulation does not render all participants equal. It stratifies them into masters and subordinates, into those who command and those who toil, into those who expropriate and those who are expropriated. It is not mere possession of capital that defines class, but the power wielded over the means of production, the sovereignty exercised in labor relations, the authority to dictate capital flow, and the systemic control over surplus appropriation. Thus, let it be etched in the annals of dialectical refutation. Destiny's mendacious misconstrual of class ontology, his woeful reduction of proletarian immiseration into an insipid syllogism of fiscal participation, must be cast into the abyss of intellectual obsolescence. For to confound stock ownership with ruling class dominion is to labor under a capitalist mirage so pernicious, so intellectually malfeasant, that it warrants nothing less than the most vociferous repudiation by the sentinels of materialist rigor.